Hey, well, everyone, and welcome back to the Hybrid Friends. Today about not a partly Azure topic, and I brought someone with me you may already know. So today we will talk about Windows Server 2025 with the amazing Jeff Woolsey. So the best man to talk about that. Jeff, you're famous, I know, but maybe for the few people on the globe who do not know you, just can you give a short introduction about yourself?
Sure, you're too kind, Flora. Thank you so much. So I'm Jeff Woolsey. I'm a principal PM manager at Microsoft. I've been here over 20 years. I'm focused on Windows Server, Azure Stack HCI, hybrid, Azure Arc. That's kind of my space. But of course, I've spent a ton of time on Hyper-V. That was part of why I joined Microsoft over 20 years ago. And you probably see me perhaps on social media like Twitter and Threads and stuff like that. My handle is at WSV_Guy, G-U-Y. And it's a pleasure. If you've seen me at Ignite or if you've seen me at any webinars, thank you so much. I'm out there, discussing what we're doing in the hybrid cloud space, because quite honestly, that's what our customers are telling us every single day. That's where they're investing in hybrid cloud.
And so from a product perspective, we had the announcement for Windows Server 2025. We have the insider preview out right now, so for testing. And there are a few features you came up with, and there are a lot of features. Today we will focus on the more hybrid and edge scenario features like AD-less clustering, which is asked for years over years now. Yes, we will get it, but why do we get it now? Why it was not earlier? What was the driver behind, for example, now AD-less?
That's a great question. There's actually a ton of innovation in Windows Server 2025 in Active Directory. Of course, it's really across the board. It's Hyper-V, it's storage, it's SDN, it's security, but Active Directory is a big part of that. And when it comes to going AD-less, yes, we've had people in the past, kind of request it, but the use cases were always a little bit, well, why would you want AD-less in a data center? That doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're going to use group policy, you're going to use AD, you're going to want consistent authentication, you're going to want consistent identity management. And so it never, while we heard every so often we'd get a query about it, it wasn't a scenario that made a ton of sense. What's interesting and what's changed is what's going on at the edge. And what we're seeing is, number one, if you look at just the power of hardware these days, I can get a server that's not much bigger than a laptop these days, filled with lots of cores, lots of memory, high-speed flash storage, even high-speed NICs, 50, even faster gigabit RDMA NICs. And so all of a sudden now I have small devices and I can easily cluster 2 or 3 of these, and I've got a highly available edge solution, and it runs, you can easily deploy it anywhere. Well, all of a sudden now the ability to be able to run this in a completely disconnected environment, in a completely, in a way that maybe AD isn't readily available and I don't want to have to manage AD at the edge. Can you give me an edge solution that I can still run? I can still do live migration. I still get high availability. I still get failover clustering. I still get all those features, but it doesn't require that I actually have to create a domain controller at the edge. And so for this reason, it made a ton of sense. And we're doing more and more at the edge. So HCI, Azure Stack HCI was, we were the first HCI to do 2 nodes, 2 very small nodes at the edge. And boy, that caught on like wildfire. Everyone was like, wait a minute, I only need 2 nodes to do this. But it still needed AD. And so now what we're doing is saying, look, you want to run 2 nodes really small at the edge and not use AD? Guess what? That's a great solution. And it's also a good example of how technology kind of percolates and moves from one place to the next. So AD-less clusters, something we've delivered in 2025, but yeah, that's going into Stack HCI. Stack HCI has features that come into Windows Server. We have features that come from Azure into Windows Server. I'll talk about one of those in a minute, but we also have stuff that goes from Windows Server to Azure. So technology really percolates, and we can use it across products where it makes sense.
Yeah, and as you already said, with the edge, we saw a lot of customers. I think it was already with 2022, who wanted to get rid of the domain controllers because for the Windows Server it wasn't really required. I could use Entra ID now, but Azure AD at that time. But everything broke with I want to build cluster. And then I needed to have my domain controllers. And I need to have them when I started up my cluster, basically. So that's for the edge, it's an amazing solution. But you already said something interesting. I'm hearing a lot of noise, rumors of some misunderstandings. So you always said Hyper-V clustering is based of everything. And then there was the messaging Hyper-V server is deprecated. I think we can put some clearance onto that topic. I know you wrote an amazing blog, but just for the next part of the conversation, we can make something pretty clear.
Yeah.
And
let me explain this super clearly, because I know that the term Hyper-V is a technology. First of all, it's a technology. It's our hypervisor technology. It's in Windows. It's in Windows Client. It's in Azure Stack HCI. It's in all the Azure Stack products. It's in Azure. So when someone says to me, Jeff, I heard that Hyper-V is deprecated, I have to keep myself from just falling out of my chair laughing, because Azure runs on Hyper-V. So let's just stop right there for a second, okay? Azure runs on Hyper-V. There are millions and millions and millions of servers in our public cloud that are running on Hyper-V. That's just there. Then there's Windows Server, which is counted in tens of millions, actually hundreds of millions of instances of Windows Server. Guess what? Those all ship with Hyper-V. Windows Client ships with Hyper-V. So Hyper-V is a strategic technology at Microsoft. We literally use it everywhere. In fact, most people don't realize this. It's actually used in Xbox, okay? It's actually even used there. So we use it throughout the product portfolio. Now, one of the things that we used to have is we used to have a free product, okay? The free product was called Microsoft Hyper-V Server. And I know this because I was the program manager that actually delivered the first 3 releases of it. I know it better than anybody else, okay? My team delivered it. And the whole reason we delivered was to have a free hypervisor, but that's all it was. It was literally just the hypervisor. It was not Windows Server. There's this misconception that it's Windows Server. It is not Windows Server. There's this misconception that it was, it had all the features of Windows Server. No, it was literally just the hypervisor. Now, we did it for many releases. We did it all the way up to 2019. But guess what? Every time we'd release a new version of Hyper-V Server, someone would say, well, I want a new feature. What do you want? Well, I want more than the hypervisor. I want the complete software-defined storage stack. I want the complete software-defined networking stack. Okay, well, we have that product. It's called Azure Stack HCI. Okay, and so that product exists. It's also in Windows Server. The other thing I'd get requests for is, well, I want Hyper-V Server to come with Windows licenses. Well, I have that. It's called Windows Server. So what people were asking for were products that already exist. At the same time, it's a different product. It's a free product. We still have to test it. We still have to validate it. It still requires dev resources. And after so many releases, it just came to the point where, like, look, we are working on so many different things, and we are stretched across all of these different places where we want to innovate. We simply don't have the time and resources to test and validate a free product. So the free product called Microsoft Hyper-V Server, just the free product, was what we announced that 2019 is the last version of Microsoft Hyper-V Server, the free product, and it will be end of support in 2029. You can download it now. You can keep using it right now. You can party on. It is richly featured. It has lots of things. It's actually the best free hypervisor on the market. But like I said, we have reached the point where we're like, we just can't afford the time and resources to do the testing and validation because it's a separate, unique SKU. And so we're putting those resources into Windows Server, into Azure Stack HCI, into hybrid capabilities, and so much more. But at the end of the day, Hyper-V is a strategic technology at Microsoft that we literally use everywhere.
And as you said, I use the Hyper-V server just for my home lab environment for testing because it just need to have a virtualization instance. If you need to have the enterprise features, as you said, SDN licensing, you will end up with some sort of enterprise operating system. And especially when you want to test the the hybrid features from the infrastructure operating system side, you can use Azure Stack HCI and pilot for 60 days for free, and you should be fine.
And you can use Windows Server 2025, So we have evaluation versions of Windows Server. So the current shipping version is 2022, and that's a 180-day evaluation. So that's a full 6 months as well.
Yeah. So it's there for testing purposes there, and to be honest, for home labs, as you can keep Hyper-V server until 2029, or there are other open source solutions which we also support with like KVM or so, where we deliver lots of things for the kernel integration of our Windows Server VMs running on those platforms. Deliver to those, and you can use them for your home lab if you want to cluster something. But it's, as I said, we need to test it. Someone needs to get paid for it, and that's basically it. But the key message, as you said, Hyper-V as a technology is core of Microsoft and core of everything we do.
Yep.
And especially it gets more and more enhancements, like you presented on Ignite. Correct me if I'm wrong. There will be a lot of good things from Azure Stack coming to HCI. There will be the AI integration with lots of our partners, like NVIDIA, like Intel, directly in Hyper-V. There will be GPU features like GPU partitioning coming to Server 25. So it's becoming more and more, or it stays more of our core technology, and what we learned from Azure and also from the scale from Azure will moving into.
Well, and that's a really good point, which is GPU partitioning. This is a perfect example of, well, we have GPU partitioning, we have GPU pools that are coming into Windows Server 2025. A bunch of this started in Azure. Like, we do GPUs in Azure. We assign GPUs, we have pools, we have partition. We have this stuff that already exists, and it's been running at planetary scale for some time now. And so now what we're doing is that technology is percolating into Windows Server, it's percolating into Azure Stack HCI, and guess what? Customers aren't getting a V1 product. They're getting something that's actually already been running and is running great in the cloud. And so we're bringing that into Windows Server. Another example is scalability. So just last week, I posted kind of some big news. This was something we've been holding off. I didn't mention this at Ignite, but we announced the new scalability numbers for Windows Server 2025. And these are numbers, I even had to write in my post on social media that these were not typos, because I knew people were going to read this and go, these are typos. These numbers are too big. That doesn't make any sense. But for the maximum memory for a virtual machine in Windows Server 2025, it's 240 terabytes. Terabytes. That's for one virtual machine. The maximum number of virtual processors per virtual machine in Hyper-V in Windows Server 2025 is 2,048. Again, 2,048 virtual processors in one VM. And what's always interesting is the number of people who go, well, who needs that? Well, guess what? AI needs that. Big data needs that. I mean, seriously? So we've set these numbers so high that we are pushing hardware to the very edge. And in terms of the maximum memory that we're going to support on a physical host, for 4-level paging, which is what most servers are, it's 256 terabytes of RAM. For newer servers like Sapphire Rapids, some of the latest AMD and Intel, we actually support 5-level paging, and means we support up to 4 petabytes. That's right, 4 petabytes of memory for a single host. So what it means is we have set the scalability targets way out there, and this is a good example of why are we doing this? Because Azure needed it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no customer knocking on my door saying, hey, Jeff, I really need you to support 240 terabytes per VM. Well, the folks over in Azure need that.
Yeah.
So,
and that's one thing that Mark Rosinovich told me a few years ago. It's that the largest Hyper-V customer, and also Ben Armstrong said the same. The largest Hyper-V customer is Microsoft Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really one thing we can also put in relation. I'm living in Germany. I'm living in a small town in Germany where we get an Intel Foundries fab, one of the latest and greatest technologies. So I think we will produce 1.2 nanometers here in 2028. And I already heard that here in that city we will produce the chips for all cloud servers for Azure, which are on the European continent. And that's, as I said, Azure is putting our hardware to the edge. It's it's pushing technology to the edge and the operating system. No one in the field will ever need that numbers, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years. But Microsoft is
but the
pushing
headroom
it.
is there.
The headroom is there because you already need it, because Microsoft is inventing its own hardware via Open Compute. And at some point, that's what we saw, I think it's now 12 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago, when I worked at Dell. I got a call from one of my Dell technicians who said, hey, I have these new servers, it's called C-Series. It's coming from Microsoft. Can you handle those? You know those guys. So, hey, C-Series, what's that? Yeah, we built that with Microsoft together, so don't talk about that. We have it for end customers now, and it's built for Microsoft, but no one understands the error codes because it's all hacks. And then there's some black magic happened in the background, and we had these Dell C-Series or Dell PowerEdge fresh air cooling at that time, because they were invented by Microsoft together with Dell, Lenovo, HP, and then 3 years later they came to the market. And it's, as I said, that's the headroom you're already building with your data. Those hardware is most likely already there, but not for end customers at that point.
Microsoft, we've been partnering with our hardware partners for decades. And one of the things that, and Mark Russinovich is definitely one of those people out there, but we are looking at what is the next new edge of compute. How do we push compute? How do we push storage? How do we push networking? How do we push interconnects with PCI? How do we push these, so that we can remove as many limitations as possible? And I'm, again, really excited about the changes that we're making in Windows Server 2025 to run just quite literally the largest bits of hardware that are shipping. And for customers that say, I also want to run things at the slight edge, guess what? We're doing that as well, and everything in the middle. So not everybody's going to want these massive scale-up servers. I mean, this is SAP, this is AI, this is huge data. Got it. Not everybody needs that. More people are in the, hey, I need a half rack, or I need a full rack of servers. But if you look at what a server has today, if you consider that let's just assume a single socket has 64 cores in it, and the industry standard is still 2 sockets. So that's 128 cores without threading in a single server. Okay, so you have 4 of these. Okay, I mean, think about how much power you've got. You've got hundreds of cores in 8U. And then you couple that with built-in flash storage, high-speed networking, RDMA networking, and you can deliver a tremendous compute in a very, very small form factor. So I look at Windows Server 2025 as we're embracing everything, again, from cloud to edge, and we want to make sure that customers can take full advantage of the next-gen hardware that's coming out.
Yeah. And also a small company. So you may already saw that Ugreen announced their NAS systems. So they are now big. They want to become big in NAS. They want to be the Synology QNAPs now with their new line. And I had it's a public discussion I had with them on LinkedIn, and they said, yeah, we tested Windows Server 2025 on on our hardware. So we maybe come up with building these small clusters so that you can just drop it somewhere in your store. Don't have these massive hardware, because they have built a small NUC system with 4 or 5 NVMe's in. And you can connect it via Thunderbolt, and then you have your cluster up and running, and it's highly performant. It's just what you need as a small store. It gives a lot of flexibility there.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned NVMe, and that kind of takes me to something I want to make sure people are aware of in Windows Server 2025. We've done a lot of work in storage in Windows Server 2025. And one of the things that has been, I'm incredibly proud of what the storage team has done here is, if you look at the Windows storage stack, it's always been highly performant, highly reliable. But in 2025, we actually wanted to do some additional optimizations specifically for NVMe. There's a lot of things that can be changed in the storage stack because you're not dealing with the fact that there's a spindle and a read-write head that has to travel looking for a location on disk. I can be more parallelism, more concurrency, higher read, higher write. It's the characteristics, the I/O flow is very different on NVMe than traditional storage. So the team spent a ton of time optimizing and creating an NVMe storage stack in 2025. And so simply going from Windows Server 2022 to 2025 on the same exact hardware, if you're using NVMe storage, you're going to see like a 70% performance improvement just by doing nothing else, because of the fact that 2025 has this new optimized storage stack for flash. And I'm just incredibly excited about this. The storage team has wanted to do this work. It took quite a bit of time to make sure, because the storage stack is already extremely mature in Windows Server, and we wanted to make sure we were delivering that same level of performance and reliability and resiliency to the NVMe storage stack, and it's tremendous. It really is exciting.
Yeah. So talking about all you already always said HCI and Windows Server in parallel. So you say, okay, they're comparable. So what's the difference then?
Great question. So, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So
there's no clear messaging. So is it edge? Is it data center? Is it what the heck?
Let's talk about this. So let's keep in mind that Windows Server and Azure Stack HCI, they're different products for a reason, and I know it could be confusing. So let's start with what the purpose of Azure Stack HCI is. Azure Stack HCI really does two things. It runs VMs and it runs containers. That's all it does. Period. End of story. You don't run SQL on it. You don't run Exchange on it. It's not a general purpose operating system. Its whole mission in life is to be the absolute best virtualization host. That's it. That's all it does. It has Hyper-V, it has software-defined storage, and it has software-defined networking. That's what it has. It doesn't have any roles. It doesn't have Active Directory, for example. It doesn't have remote desktop services. It doesn't have those other things. Those are in Windows Server. So Azure Stack HCI is designed to run VMs and containers and to be managed from the cloud. And the reason is real simple. Customers are embracing hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is the long-term durable state. That's where the entire planet is going. This world of everything's going to run on premises, that is gone. That doesn't exist. We're way beyond that. If you look at multiple surveys, it's like 1% of customers fit in the we do private cloud only space. Nobody's doing that anymore. If you look at public cloud only, that's a relatively small number too. I think it's like 24% I saw in the latest Flexera State of the Cloud. And most of those customers are generally relatively new organizations. Because if you said, Jeff, we're going to build a new company today, we have no infrastructure, we have no IT, we have no servers, of course you're going to do it in the cloud. Why wouldn't you do it in the cloud? However, the vast majority, that 70+%, are in the middle, and they want to do hybrid. And so Stack HCI is about saying, look, we know you're going to do stuff in Azure. Maybe you want to take advantage of Azure Virtual Desktops, M365, Azure SQL, but wouldn't it be great if you could manage all of this from the same portal? And so Azure Stack HCI is managed from the Azure portal. That's what Azure Stack HCI is all about. Windows Server is a general purpose operating system, and it has been for 3 decades. Okay, and Windows Server is about running remote desktop. It's about running Active Directory. It's about running file. It's about running print. It's a runtime. It runs SQL, Exchange, and SharePoint. Now, let's be clear. It has the same Hyper-V. It has the same software-defined storage. It has the same software-defined networking. Let me say that again. Windows Server 2025, same Hyper-V, same storage, same networking. However, it has all this other stuff too. Active Directory, file, print. It's a general purpose operating system. The difference is management. Azure Stack HCI, that's managed from the Azure portal. Windows Server is managed from System Center, running on premises, running where you, the user, have to deliver enterprise management. You have to patch it, you have to manage it, you have to do all the care and feeding because it's enterprise management. And if you want to Arc enable your servers, you'll be able to manage it in the cloud as well. But Azure Stack HCI is built and designed to be run from the managed from the cloud. That's the difference.
Yeah, and as you said, especially the management. So basically, we have the infrastructure component, we have the Azure management, so that we have one single pane of glass to manage everything. And what I encountered when I discuss with my customers, and as you said, there is always these, I cannot go full public cloud. And for most of them, you can discuss about everything, but there's one thing you cannot discuss against is physics. I have a lot of mining customers somewhere out in the Badlands of Australia or South America or Africa who say the nearest data center for us is 200 milliseconds away. Somewhere through the outback. And in this case, they want to have these streamlined solution. They just want to have the infrastructure running. They want to have this overall Azure management. And here, as you said, Azure Stack HCI is the perfect use case because it brings these, feels like public cloud management, but I have it near to what basically to my machinery, which I need to control.
Yeah, and one thing to think about is that management layer. Think about if there's any IT pros, sysadmins, VMware admins out there. Think about this for a second. If you're a VMware admin, you know vCenter like the back of your hand. You love your vCenter, you're used to it, you know where all the features are. Great. There's been some changes over there. Some of these changes are significant price increases. And while you've been able to convince your boss, we're going to stay on VMware, when your boss gets a price increase that's 5x, 10x, they're going to say, we need to change. We're not paying 10x. I'll give you a perfect example. I spoke to a customer at Ignite who went from an $8 million annual renew to $100 million. And I even pushed them. I said, no, that can't be real. That can't be real. Come on. There's no way. And there were 3 people sitting across the table from this organization. They said, Jeff, we escalated it because the partner couldn't believe it. And they came back and they said, no, that's true. It's going from $8 to $100 million. So this organization has said, okay, we are moving to something, but forget about the hypervisor. What's the management tools that I should be training the next generation of IT pros? What's the tools that my next generation sysadmin can be? It's the Azure portal, because the Azure portal gives you a way to manage all of your resources, whether it's on Azure Stack HCI, whether it's in a VMware environment, whether it's in another cloud, whether it's distributed hybrid multi-cloud, gives you a way to manage all of this. That's what you want to have on your resume. You want a long career in IT, you want a long career in as a system administrator, the Azure portal is where you want to be. There's some tiny bit of career advice there.
Yeah, and that's also where I normally get slapped by our account teams is I don't care if it's Azure Stack HCI, if it's Windows Server, if it's our friends from Google, AWS. I don't care, especially if I'm talking about workloads at Kubernetes. I don't care. Just run it wherever you want. Build the application so that it can run everywhere. And then just put Arc as your management component and the Azure portal on top. I had that talk to a startup, I think 6 or 7 months ago. they were building a new product, and they were said, yeah, we now have a customer who wants to run it on Azure Stack HCI. And it was built on Azure Service Bus, and said, no, I cannot build that in Azure Stack HCI. What's your issue? Let's have another thought. And they said, yeah, we could also do it on Kubernetes. I said, then do on Kubernetes. You build it for every other platform on that globe, because everyone is doing Kubernetes nowadays. Just keep the management. And then they said, yeah, but how to manage all those stuff if I'm running on so many different platforms? And here comes Arc.
Yes.
You have your single pane of glass, you have your management, and you don't care where you run your containers. You just need to spin up the. Yes, it's easier with Azure Stack HCI because you have the resource bridge. You can spin it up easily, but you do not limit your product to that specific platform. And we really had that business discussion on the more private space then, because I'm an engineer that normally don't talk business, but I said, hey, look on our market share. Look on the market share of Azure Stack HCI or of Azure Stack Hub. You limit yourself to a small percentage of that market share. If you want to do that, you can already close your business. And that convinced them. They really built it that way to be adjustable to any platform. But as you said, took the advice on train your stuff on the management level. The only thing you need is a flexible application and someone who knows the management level in and out.
It's your advice is something I've heard this time and time again from customers, which is, yes, we've got VMs, we've got hundreds, if not thousands of VMs, and we're going to have them for a while. Great, VMs are going to continue to be around, for decades. They've been around since the 60s. Come on, everybody. Virtual machines is great. Virtualization is great technology. It's not going to disappear tomorrow.
Yeah.
The difference is, as new applications are being built, developers are looking at containers going, you know what? I get to just focus on the app.
Yeah.
I just focus on everything that sits inside this container bubble, and this is great. And generally what we see is developers like the fact that, look, I can develop this on my laptop, I can push this up to the Azure Kubernetes Service, I can test it, I can run it at crazy scale, validate everything it works, and as part of my CI/CD pipeline, I can update this multiple times a day, and it all just works. But it's when the developer goes and tells the boss, and the boss goes, that's great, except we need it to run on premises. That's when you go, that's okay. With Azure Stack HCI, you're running AKS there. Tell your developer, instead of pointing it to Azure AKS in the cloud, point it to AKS on Azure Stack HCI, and they don't have to make any code changes. And that's music to a developer's ears, and it's music to the boss's ears, because the boss just wants innovation to happen fast. And he wants it to be able to innovate anywhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it also reduces the investment for the boss, because it's, as you know, innovation brings costs. And if I can innovate without learning a new platform, if I can focus on my business, building that tremendous famous app, that's what brings back the money for my shareholders, for my own pockets, whatsoever. But even with the Windows Server space, hybrid is not. I think even if you would try, you get some more hybrid components, or at least some enhancement from the hybrid space directly to the Windows Server. Just, you can explain it a bit deeper. We changed the licensing model for Server 2025 to be more flexible with Azure, and also you can enable Arc by default, an Arc integration by default in the Windows Server, and it's some clear innovation into as hybrid management using what you have from Azure Consumed Revenue, so ACR, Azure Consumed Revenue, already.
Yeah, and in the case of Azure Arc, what we started seeing as more and more people deploying it, and now it's taken off like crazy with the Azure Arc. What we are seeing is, once people actually try Azure Arc, and and Arc enable a server. And all we're talking about here is installing an agent. That's all we're talking about. There's nothing crazy or anything. You install an agent and you Arc enable your Windows server, for example. All of a sudden, it appears in the Azure portal as a metadata representation. So even though it's running, sitting next to me on a server right here on premises, it's not running in the cloud, I can see it in the cloud. And now all of a sudden I can do things like enable monitoring services or security or policy and governance and all of these things and do it in a consistent way. And so as more people have been trying it, they were like, wow, Jeff, this is really great. How do we make this super easy? So one of the things we did in 2025 is there's like literally a button in the sys tray. Click on that and you can install and Arc enable your servers in no time. You can, of course, do it through PowerShell. You can do it through, there's a number of different ways where you want to script it or you actually want to run through UI. But the goal here was to make it really, really easy. And it's one thing I always tell customers when it comes to Azure Arc. Usually they, I'll explain to them the benefits and I tell them like, look, don't believe a word I said. Just don't believe anything I said. Just go try it. Because if you Arc enable a server, that costs you nothing. It's free. The whole Arc enabling a server, there's nothing to it. It's $0. It's when you say, okay, I want to start monitoring a workload, then we're going to need some storage up in the cloud. Okay, or I'm going to do some security stuff with Defender. Okay, then we're going to need a little, some storage up there as well for things like that. But just Arc enabling a server and having it show up in the Azure portal is completely free. Yep. And we actually have some free services as well. So I always tell people, please give Azure Arc a try.
Yeah, it's like a free-to-play game.
Yeah,
you can play it, but if you want to do the shortcuts, you need to pay. But yeah, it's free to play with pay to win. To be honest, if you want to do it from the gaming world, but yeah, as I said, it's and I'm personally enabling even my clients to be managed with Arc. Yes, I know it's not supported, but I can see my clients. I can see the status as I'm out of traveling sometimes, so that's why I want to see my service. I want to see how my demo environment is working, and I just want to maybe try a few things so I can just do it for free, enable it, use it, and it's free of charge. Last tricky question you may not want to answer. If everything's the same, will we see features like Azure Virtual Desktop on Windows Server? I know people are asking because
I know they're asking, and let me answer that question. Azure Virtual Desktop is an Azure feature. It's a feature of Azure, which requires Azure Stack HCI. So it's not something that's coming to Windows Server.
Okay. So bit of disappointment at the end, Jeff, but there were so many great things. We at least need to deliver one bad message.
It's not a bad message. It's a consistent message. Okay, it's Azure Virtual Desktop has been extremely popular in the cloud, and it was the #1 requested service that customers wanted on premises by a mile, not even close. And so we were like, okay, we're going to do this, but it's an Azure technology and it needs to run on an Azure property, which is why it's Azure Stack HCI. One last thing I wanted to mention, by the way, we were talking about Edge throughout early in the conversation. I also want to point out, in addition to the work we did around AD-less clusters for the Edge, there's a couple of small, nice fit and finish things that we did that I want to make sure don't get ignored. Like, for example, we enabled Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and stuff like that. And I've had a number of people ask me, go, Jeff, why do you care about Wi-Fi and Bluetooth? I'm like, it's not the data center, it's the Edge. In the Edge, you may not have anything but Wi-Fi, and you still need to connect a keyboard or a mouse. So we put those things in there. Once you start realizing, oh yeah, it's for Edge customers and Edge scenarios, that's where it makes sense.
Yeah, you're correct. So even it would make my life, or would have made my life a bit easier here, as I only have a few LAN ports and nothing more. And if I would have, you were able to do Wi-Fi in the earlier stage, but it was horrible to get the drivers working. It was always unstable, and having that option to just take my rack, drop it somewhere at the end of my room, so there's enough room over there, and not pulling any cables through the floor, reducing a bit of my mess, would have been an amazing option in the past. And getting that, or just be able to put my servers in the closet without drilling another hole in a wall from a rented office. Especially, I know US walls, and I also know German walls. It's completely different. So it's not only wood and paper here. So that's why drilling a hole here, especially in a newer building where you have all these steel and concrete, could be horrible. And if you just can do that with Wi-Fi, it's cool. And
yeah, it's a nice edge feature, really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Good that you said it. That was really one thing. As someone who worked with Windows Server for 2 decades or more than 2 decades now, it was just something I personally didn't realize because I never thought about that. But yeah.
It is again, it's one of those things that's easy to miss, but you'll appreciate it when you realize you need it.
Yeah.
You're deploying a couple of edge servers in an agriculture environment where you're actually putting it in a barn, or you're monitoring cows, or you're monitoring feed, or you're in a manufacturing environment or something, and you realize all we have out here is Wi-Fi. Okay, guess what? It'll work.
Yeah. I had I was working with a mine in Chile 15 years ago, and they only had Wi-Fi on, but they needed to manage their Caterpillar trucks and so on. And if you ever saw such a Caterpillar trucks, the really large ones with those 3-4 meter tires, and they have like a house of technology in, but they cannot pull a cable behind them, so they were connected via Wi-Fi. And now with having more and more software control, more soft SPS, more software running IoT, because the hardware is so performant, you will see more servers, more ruggedized servers. And then you have, as you said, those wireless connections supported within the server directly, so you don't need to build anything around it. Like, it was horrible, for example, to build it on those cranes, because if you have the copper cranes, when they were just put in the copper to dry, they were always moving up and down the field. So you need to have your antenna pointing directly to the other antenna and moving together. And that is horrible to program. And if you just can use a plain Wi-Fi access point pointing to your servers,
you never know what you're going to run into when you're trying to do stuff at the edge. And like I said, what we want to do is we want to enable more things that can happen at the edge. The fact that hardware is so much more powerful and so much more compact, it really is staggering how much power you can get in a small server these days. So very excited about that. And of course, we've only scratched the surface of what's new in Windows Server 2025. I would also recommend, we have our sessions from Ignite. We also had the Windows Server Engineering Summit just a week or so ago. And we have literally, I think it's 30 sessions over the course of 3 days, going deep into all aspects of Windows Server: hybrid, storage, compute, networking, security, Active Directory, best practices, you name it.
Yeah, and we have already a good lab environment out there. I had a chat with Jaromir Kaspar in one of our previous videos, where we already introduced the lab environment from Dell to deploy Windows Server 2025, which is MS Lab, and it's easy to deploy. I think he also did a session how to do it on the Windows Server Engineering Summit. I will link all those sessions in the description. But for the audience, if there are more questions, if we have enough questions, I maybe can get Jeff back on screen to talk to us. But for today, thank you so much for the open talk, Jeff. And it was amazing to talk to you again after, I think it was 7 years now that we didn't talk. Something like that. So last time.
I appreciate it. Thank you much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Then have a great one. Thank you so much. For everyone else, subscribe to the channel, leave us comments, leave us questions, and always new topics we can talk about. Then, bye.